Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another video game review video. Today's review is going to be God Eater Resurrection. Yes, I finally get to dive into one of my games, my bucket list games for 2021 that I've been wanting to dive into. And aside from one other series, God Eater is one of those series where I was kind of interested for a while now, for a very long while. And what really started to kick in that movement to finally dive into it was, of course, Code Vein. If you didn't know, Code Vein technically is what you would call a side story to that of the God Eater series. And you don't realize that until literally towards the end of the game, where you kind of see one of the creatures that appears from the God Eater series. And so, with that being said, this moment that I found that out, I was like, well, that's even more of a reason for me to finally dive into God Eater, right? So, what did I think about God Eater Resurrection? How do I feel about it? And what are my thoughts are as I'm planning on moving forward into the series? Well, I don't know how to explain this, but I guess the only way to explain it is talk about the game first. So I want to go ahead and firstly foremost inform people of what God Eater really is in terms of an instant preference. And the only reason why I say that is because most people would probably have a very, very limited idea of what God Eater really is. Well, in the simplest way, allow me to bluntly say it. It is a Monster Hunter clone. I'm not even exaggerating. That's literally what it is. Now, of course, I've never really played a Monster Hunter game, but I am familiar with the premise ideal. You know, you have your central hub, and you go out on random missions, hunting down creatures, killing giant monsters and stuff of that nature, and as you kill these monsters, you're collecting parts and components in order to make add-ons, in order to create a variety of different weapons, armors, and stuff like that, and upgrading them depending. Now, surprisingly, this actually has a terminology called hunting games. And I didn't know that was a thing. I did not know that that particular variety of gameplay had a genre term. But now that I know, it's called hunting games. So, while that's not exactly a bad ideal, my first-hand experience with this gameplay style is a little bit mixed. So, whenever I talk about this, it's only because I've never really had a hands-on experience with a game like this. So, my personal opinions may very well be different to that of many other people who have played Monster Hunter or any game that has this similar gameplay style. So, whenever I say the phrase is a little bit repetitive, take that with a grain of salt, because you're talking to someone who grinds levels and stuff of that nature in JRPGs and regular RPGs and action RPGs of that sort. I farm for materials, I farm for money, I farm for experience, so on and so forth. So, what's the difference between what I normally do versus God Eater? Or Monster Hunter for that matter? Well, pretty good handful of different things. For example, instead of grinding for progression, you're grinding for and please forgive me whenever I say this, grinding for a random chance of getting a item that you need in order to make that particular weapon / component. So, yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know if I like this or not. Because it's not so much that you have to grind to get the item in question. You're grinding for a potential chance of receiving said item. So it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's the way I normally would like to go for. Because, unfortunately, you can't just go and tackle in on random enemies and stuff, hoping to have that item automatically. I mean, record, that's the same way with, like, Kingdom Hearts, for example. You don't automatically get that item. You have to fight, like, 5 or 10 of them until it finally drops. But when you got, like, certain missions that tells you a tier list of percentage chance of getting a particular item, that's when your brain goes, is it even worth it? And the answer is, probably not. And so, really, in all honesty, that's kind of like my biggest gripe, really, whenever I think about it all, is the fact that I don't like the whole, like, having to grind for materials for a chance to progress. If I wanted to progress, I would rather grind for experience rather than grind for materials and stuff in the hopes of either upgrading my weapons or getting a better weapon or stuff of that nature. But aside from grinding for materials, there's also another grind feature, in which case you can attain God Arcs. God Arcs is what I would like to call a weapon slash ability sets, or skills as the game would call it. And so these God Arcs are different variety of skills. Some of them either increases how much OP you can get, which is your Oracle points, which you use for guns. It can help recover stamina quickly. Either you have the ability to where when you devour, you can either get more HP and stuff. And the list goes on for different variety of different stats and skills that you can attain within the game. And it's one of those things where it's like, I kind of see where this kind of goes, but at the same time, the execution towards it is also one that I didn't like. For example, when you get far enough into the game, you do start to have the accessibility of, after each mission, you get a random chance of getting certain God Arcs. Yes, you heard me whenever I say this, random skill sets. In other words, after you beat a mission, you have 3 different God Arcs. You don't pick them, they are given to you right off the back after the mission. So you have 3 random skills. These 3 random skills could be anything depending on whatever skill it is that's available within the game. And depending on how much further you are in the game, you can actually get certain ability traits that stack on top of each other. For example, there'll be like a chance where you'll get an ability where it has 2 different sets of skills with it and stuff like that, to which you can equip it to your weapon and armor. So in other words, it's really crucial to do more of these different missions to where you can get different skills and stuff. But again, if you want to get a specific type of skill that you think you would desirably need, that's whenever things can be a little bit of annoying, where you have to keep going on missions just to get that random skill that you specifically want. In fact, technically, there's another section to that where you can combine these skills in the skill builder, where you put in all these different skills and stuff like that, and depending on what more you have, preferably, you will get that particular God Arc skill to add in for either your sword, your gun, or your shield. And while that's not a bad thing, the only problem is, much like how you attain the 3 every mission, this is also random chance, or at least it seems random. According to some people, they say it's random. I've kind of experimented. It doesn't seem random. It seems somewhat semi-set, but there's no like formula set of where it's like, hey, if you pick this handful of skills and this handful of skills, you'll be guaranteed to get this one, because the variety is unlimited. So it's kind of like one of those things where you're like, how do I go about building this particular thing? Well, there isn't really a guide that tells you, hey, here's a whole list of different skills and how you can get them. No, it's about as random as you're gonna get, and unfortunately, I kind of hate that. It makes it feel like as though if it's like a loot box thing, which is even more scummier, because technically, the only online thing this game has is through multiplayer. There is no microtransaction, there is no anything else. It's just, again, it's all random, and again, the execution, not really that good. These things alone is what slows me down into enjoying God Eater that much more, these elements aside. But aside from that though, the game is actually difficult by itself. It's pretty challenging depending on your overall skill set by yourself. Like, for example, if you're just playing through the game on your own, could you beat it? Yes, but no at the same time. Yes, because all you're doing is going through these different missions. There's no, like, extra step that you gotta take or stuff. Well, in some cases there is, but I'll get to that in just a sec. But there are some cases where these monsters do get harder as you progress through the levels and stuff, as you progress through the difficulty and the story. So it does actually get harder, to a point where even I would have to say maybe a bit too hard, but that's just from me. In fact, really, in all honesty, if you want to be more precise, the best way to explain it is that you have to look at each individual creature and analyze how to fight them. In other words, depending on what you've got equipped right now, you may not be well equipped to fight that monster. So in other words, every mission before you go into the mission, and this is every mission, depending on your skill set and everything like that, every mission you need to look through your armor, your weapons and everything, and see what you currently have equipped. Then you look at the monster that you're about to fight, analyze what its weaknesses is, and then equip yourself towards those weaknesses if you want an easier experience. The only problem is having that particular skill set to where that way you can be better prepared. Now, another thing too is that technically there is no level up thing. It's just build your weapons, upgrade them and stuff like that up until you're at the max to where you can fight on to the next part. And while that's not a bad thing, I have nothing wrong against upgrading your weapons and stuff like that. But I noticed something odd, and it threw me off so badly, and this is actually another level that I did not care much for out of God Eater, and that is limitation in terms of upgrading your weapons. So, in the game, you get materials, right? You need these materials in order to make a variety of weapons, as well as to upgrade them respectively. Now, the unfortunate thing is that every weapon actually has a limiter that prevents you from upgrading to the next level. Now, this is understandable unless you actually have the materials necessary in order to upgrade it. In other words, if you already got the upgrades needed to upgrade that weapon to the next tier, it will not let you until you beat that difficulty level. Once you get through it, then you can upgrade your weapons to the next tier. And it's like, I don't know, again, odd mix and matches that I definitely felt like could have been perfected, but at the same time, it was more or less holding me back from enjoying the experience overall. So again, aside from the fact that you have to grind for materials, you have the fact that you have to grind for guard arcs, for random skill abilities that you don't even know if you're going to get or not, and then the difficulty aside, I did enjoy God Eater. That's actually a surprise, I know, but I did enjoy God Eater to a particular level. Even though I complained about all of that, what did I enjoy out of God Eater so much? Well, there are a few main reasons why. Reason number one, the monster designs. I've been familiar with the monster designs of God Eater for quite some time. In fact, technically I played a game that is connected to the God Eater series to some aspects, known as Project X Zone, where you got to fight some of these Aragami, which is the enemy's type names. The Aragami, I got to fight a couple of the types. So I got to see what they looked like in terms of designs, and I do like the different designs that these creatures have. It's actually really cool, and I do admire them. Not only that too, but the way you actually have to fight the creatures is another thing that I appreciate, you know. Again, going into detail, you actually have to fight the monsters, but each one has a weakness, and depending on that weakness, you can either beat them quicker or take a long time in fighting them. So you have either the elemental weaknesses, which, depending on if you're fighting them with that exact element, it's going to be a 10% decrease, according to what I read. Or, if you break their bounds, in other words, break their different parts and stuff, you can deal more damage to them. A perfect example, these creatures, I forgot what they're technically called, but they're winged creatures, where basically, more than likely, you're more or less going to fight their leg area. But if you break down their leg areas, you can do more damage, allowing you to kill them quicker. It's very interesting that they implement this particular level of detail when it comes to fighting these different Aragamis. So like, for example, you're fighting one of the more harder monsters and stuff like that. If you want to kill them quicker, you're gonna have to break down their little barrier that they have, break it down to where you can do more damage to them. And you can do this a number of ways. Either you can do counter elements, which by every mission that you go on, sometimes they will tell you what their weaknesses are, so you can go in better prepared. Or you have a weapon that does crushing damage, which basically break in their armor, allowing you to do more damage. Or if you want to bypass that armor limiter, you can just simply use what's called piercing damage, which goes through the armor damage in question. Of course, there's a couple of things that you can do in order to do piercing damage, either by the spear weapon or using your gun ammunition, which does piercing damage. Now, of course, that being said, there is, however, another way that you could get better at the game. And aside from attaining materials and stuff like that, you do actually get to a point in the game where you can customize your bullets. Yes, customize your bullets. And this is, on the one hand, a pretty cool mechanic to have in the game. I won't deny it, it's actually a really cool mechanic to have. But on the other hand, it's a little bit over my head at times, you know, unless you just went in there and just want to experiment with it, just to fool around and stuff like that. You really have to know how everything works out, how well it's going to work for you and everything. So if you're not familiar with how the bullet customization works, thankfully there are guides out there that can show you how to customize these bullets. Some of them involving either using a sniper rifle bullet called the HDH bullets, or you can use different variety of different weapons and stuff like that and customize it that way. So it's an interesting layer of depth that goes on with the bullet types. And in fact, the more I think about it, the more I thought to myself, the gameplay is geared towards the bullets, even though you're using your God Arc weapon, but really it's mostly to help build up your Oracle points so that you can continue shooting the enemy. And I kind of juggle between back and forth between using gun weapons versus actually using the melee weapons in particular. And I have to say, it's a weird balancing act, but honestly it kind of works for the game, because depending on the person's playstyle, it's kind of free roam, which is nice. I do like that feature. And aside from that though, I did very much enjoy the story that was inside of God Eater. The story, of course, takes place in 3 different segments, or at least according to what I was reading, most people would call them arc series. You know, you have the first part, which basically consists of the character known as Shio arc series. Then you have the second part, which consists of a character by the name of Lendo arc series. And then you have a final segment in which where I would probably call this the second Nova arc, or the final arc rather. And really, in all honesty, I kind of like this in a way. I kind of like this interesting storytelling and stuff like that, because as you're progressing through the story, you can go through the mission stories and stuff like that, or if you want to progress further into the story, sometimes they won't be there for your next mission, which means you have to talk to another NPC in order to progress through the story. Which isn't a bad thing, you know, I'm familiar with this style, sort of the same way with that of, like, for example, .hack, for example. And really, whenever it's all said and done, depending on how far you've gotten into the game, if you're able to get the right skills you need, the right abilities, everything in genuine, fully stock on items, fully prepared and everything like that, I could actually say that this game can be enjoyable. Once you get down to the brass tacks of things, once you have everything right, once you get every single thing perfect, the way you wanted it to be, the game can and will be entertaining for the individual, especially if you stick with it for the long haul. I didn't want just to drop the game just because it wasn't entertaining. I didn't want to drop the game because it was starting to lose interest to me. I wanted to continue to see if it can be entertaining by the time I got to the end of the story. And I have to say, it finally did. By the time I finally got to the final boss, it finally did get to be an entertaining experience. Although I will say, the final boss kept kicking my ass. That final boss kept killing me over and over again. It took me so long to finally figure out how to fight that thing. But I finally beat it. I felt satisfied knowing that I finally figured it out. And I have to say, it involved mostly experimenting with it, which, again, involves back to my old concept of how I kind of like how you have to experiment with these different weapons, equipments, and stuff to see what works well, not only for you, but what works well in order to fight that particular monster. And I do appreciate that. It's a detail that very few people would enjoy, but it's a detail enough on its own where I can actually safely say I did have fun with this. And at first, at one point in time, I actually thought to myself I should hold my review for God Eater Resurrection until I play the second one. But after playing through Resurrection, I feel like I have enough groundworks to actually determine what I feel about God God Eater Resurrection. And that is, for a first time playing a hunter-based game, I ain't gonna lie, this was actually a fun game to actually interact with. Pretty entertaining, pretty enjoyable. I do have a few little tweaks that I would like to see being enhanced going forward into the series whenever I continue forward, is to see a little bit more improvements. Now, naturally, you can build weapons that can increase the amount of rarity and God Arc abilities that you can get. You can get abilities that require you to get more money. You can get abilities that allows you to get better drops and stuff. So I mean, it's not like it's impossible levels. You can adjust, but again, you have to grind in order to get those improvements just to get there. Until then, it can feel very grindy, and depending on the person, you may not like this as much as everyone else does. If you are one of the type of people who do enjoy grinding for materials, grinding in order to build up your weapons and armors and stuff like that, this game is for you. I would argue and say this game is pretty good. Although if I have to say one thing, there are a few little tips that I can give to players who probably have never experienced God Eater in genuine. So allow me to give you a few tidbits that will help. Tidbit number 1. If you want to increase your defense, and if you feel like the enemies are killing you in one hit, if you want to increase your defense, you're going to have to do two things. 1, build a better shield. The shield is going to be the biggest aspect that you need, and so depending on your playstyle, depends on which type of shield you need. You have the buckler, you have the mid, and you have the tower shield. The tower shield gives you the best defense. So in other words, if you want to have a better defense, you're going to have to equip a tower shield in order to provide you with a better defense. Secondly, you're going to need to equip an ability known as defense, or DEF as it would be called. Stacking this will allow you to increase your defense. Now, of course, you can't just keep equipping defensive skills, you're going to need some other skills to help you get through the game. For example, there'll be some skills that help increase your HP, your stamina, your oracle points. Some can help you increase your melee attack, so on and so forth. So you're going to need to balance it out between whether or not you want to have more defense, or if you want to be able to have more attack power. In fact, technically, I believe there is a set limiter to how many defense abilities that you actually do get to equip. I do believe there is a stopping point somewhere. I don't know where that is, but I'm pretty sure it does stop after a number of defense skill buffs. And so afterwards, after so many ones, I don't think it really matters. So you can't just have like all the freaking skill points be defensive points. No, you gotta have some form of extra stuff, because eventually it does stop stacking, I believe. I may be wrong, and I'm sure some people may have experimented with that, but I'm pretty sure that there is no exact set way to get your defense to increase. But those are some of the few ways that I've noticed. If you are losing your HP too quickly, either get a better shield, which is that to have a tower shield and upgrade to its max possibility, and then to equip multiple defensive ability skills for your weapons, shield, and your actual character build per se. Secondly, experiment, experiment, experiment. If you feel like as though as if something's not working for you, do not stick with that. Experiment with the different weapons. I mean, seriously, you have so many different weapons options to choose from. It's not even funny. You have practically 6 different melee options, followed by, if I'm not mistaken, if I count it right, about 6 if not 5 gun options in total. So you can experiment with these 2 options to see which one you prefer better. Chances are you'll find something, and definitely experiment with combos. Don't be afraid, be bold, try to experiment with the combos and see what works well for you. And depending on what you'll discover, chances are you may prefer that particular weapon overall. I know at first I wanted to just stick with the spear weapon, but I ended up juggling between not only the spear as well as the scythe weapon, but I also went for the long blade, mostly because not only did the long blade provide better recovery of oracle points, but it also has a secondary option to where you can fire bullets from the main blade itself. So it does provide a little bit better of attack power depending. And of course, like I said, both the Reaper Scythe and the long blade helps give you more oracle points, to where you can save that and store it and then fire it on the enemy with your main bullets, depending on how you customize it. So, at the end of the day, what would I rate God Eater Resurrection? Well, again, I'm a little bit off par with it. There are some things that I really enjoyed out of this game, and it really made it so entertaining and fun. On the other hand, though, there were some elements that I felt like definitely could have been perfected, or a better way of doing it. For example, if you wanted to, say for example, build a particular skill set, you could have easily done something differently. Like for example, you could have picked out particular skill sets and it would require a certain amount of funds to tear down that part in order to add it on together, to build it up better and stuff. So in other words, yes, you would have had to grind some more cash or more components, but at least you were able to build a better skill set tree if you wanted it to. You know, at least have something like that to where you could. Not this randomizer that you can put together and stuff like that by throwing in a whole bunch of items and see what happens. No, I want a better build set because, say for example, there's a particular ability that you like better. If you wanted to get that particular ability and stuff like that, you need to build it in a certain way, in a certain pattern, you know, stuff like that. If you can do gun customization and experiment through that way, why couldn't you do that with the guard arc abilities as well? You know, do something like that. And then, of course, finally, I probably would like it better if maybe there might have been like a level skill or whatever, instead of just randomly having to grind for materials and stuff in order to upgrade your weapons. I would have liked to have had a little bit of a level up skill to some degree. Not a major one, but something that actually would be beneficial. So I would probably give this game a 3 out of 5 star. I say 3 out of 5 because depending on the person, depends on if they're going to enjoy it or not. It's very grindy, and depending on your position, it will be difficult and challenging. Not only that, it can feel like as though as if it's very random. But if you can build your perfect character, the perfect build, actually find the weapon of choice that you prefer, and have the perfect skill set with your set character, you can and will enjoy the game that much better. Well, anyway guys, that's going to be it for this video review. Let me know in the comments below, have you played God Eater Resurrection? How do you feel about it yourself? Do you feel like you understand the game better than what I do? Chances are you probably have, because like I said, most of it kind of blew over my head. But I'm just kind of glad that I was able to enjoy it to some degree. It's not a bad game, it's just a game that I feel like could have been improved. Hopefully these improvements will be founded as I go into the second and the third of God Eater series. So hopefully that'll be good. I'm hoping that'll be good. Because again, the game's fun, entertaining enough on its own. So I say the second and third one might get better. Hopefully it will, but we'll find out how that goes. But anyway guys, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.